Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Ecclesiastes class. We are in class number 13 today. And today we're going to be doing all of chapter 11 and part of chapter 12, the first 8 verses. There are only 14 verses, so we're going to leave the last 6 verses for next week, which will be our final class on Ecclesiastes. But then we're also going to get into another subject we've been kind of talking about all during this class, and that is, where do we think Solomon is today? We're going to get into what clues the Bible gives us. We obviously can't know the answer to that, but we're going to get into the clues that the Bible gives us on that. And to those of you joining us at home, thank you for joining us. We pray God is blessing you, and we pray He will be with you at this Christmas season and also in this new year as we enter it. So if you're following us at home, please open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. And if you're here in class, it's in your notes. By the way, if you're at home and you want to download the notes, you can download the notes from the site on YouTube that you're watching, or from the site on Facebook that you're watching it from. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 11, verse 1. This is Solomon talking. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days, you may receive a return. Kind of interesting. So he's saying, ship your grain across the seas. Actually, normally I use the NIV translation. I'm going to switch today to a different translation of that. I'm going to use the Koren translation. This is written by Jewish rabbis, by the way. It's a translation that translates from Hebrew into English. There are certain things where I feel that Jewish rabbis have an advantage over Christian translators because they maybe understand the connotations of the Hebrew a little bit better. So let me read you what they say here in the Koren translation. Rather than saying ship your grain across the sea, it says cast thy bread upon the waters. That's quite different, as you can see. It's quite a different connotation of the two. I think that helps us to understand what kind of grain is being talked about here. When he says ship your grain across the sea, presumably the grain that's being talked about is wheat, because wheat is what we make bread from. So let's assume that it's probably wheat. We don't necessarily know that, but it's probably wheat. So one is saying cast your bread upon the waters, which doesn't necessarily imply the sea, but the other one says ship your grain across the sea, which obviously is talking about shipping. It's talking about taking grain, putting it in a ship, and sending it out to sea, whereas the Koren translation is talking about taking your bread and throwing it into the water. So let's talk about that a bit. What is bread in our lives? And what is bread in the Bible? It's a symbol of sustenance of life. That's when we see bread in the Bible, it's talking about something that sustains our life. So when we say, cast your bread upon the waters, the Lord might be saying, be prepared to take the sustenance of your life and put it out there and take a chance on it. Put it out into a place where it can be destroyed. So why would we want to do that, right? Why would we want to take the sustenance of our lives, our food, the stuff that sustains our lives, and put it in a place out there where it can be destroyed? Because it says, after many days you may receive a return. So what the Lord seems to be saying here, presumably, and there is some dispute on this, there are a number, because there's different translations, there's a number of different understandings of what this means. What the Lord may be saying is, don't keep your sustenance, your grain, your bread for yourself. Give some of it away. Put some of it out there for other people to use. That if we share what we have with the poor, with people who need it, then yes, we're going to lose some of it now, but eventually it will find its way back. Remember, it says, after many days you may receive a return. So over time, we may receive something back. It may not be grain coming back, but it may be that we are receiving something back from the Lord, some sort of blessing for the Lord. So as I look at these two translations, which are so different, my thinking about this is that he's saying, be prepared to take the stuff that you would normally store up in your pantry or whatever, the stuff that's going to sustain your life, and be prepared to share it with your poor people or with poor people around you. And someday you will probably receive a return from that. And that return may come from those people, but more likely it'll come from the Lord. So the Lord is asking us to share what we have with others, is how I interpret this. There are other people that look at it differently. That's how I see that. Questions on that one before we move on? Okay, let's move to verse 2. Invest in seven ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. So the Lord is giving us some advice to diversify, right? How many times do we see ads on television of some financial advisor or other who's telling us diversify, let me help you get your assets put in a place where you don't have all your eggs in one basket, where your money, your assets, whatever is diversified out there into a bunch of different places. Because the fact is, things can happen. If you have your assets in one place and something goes wrong in that place, you can lose everything. I'm always reminded of the famous story of a guy from the 1890s who had made a lot of money. He had a great business, made a lot of money, but knew that the people that were surviving him and his family weren't capable of handling that money. So he decided to pick one very good company that he knew had been around for a long, long time and was going to continue to be around for a long, long time, and put all of his money, every single penny, into that company, into that stock. And it was a company that made buggy whips. And his thinking was that buggies have been around forever. They're pulled by horses. Horses pulling buggies are going to be around forever. And the buggy whips this company made was a really high-quality buggy whip. So people will want high-quality buggy whips forever. Well, a year later, in 1895, 5 different inventors invented the automobile. Things changed in the buggy whip business. Within a few years, his investment had gone bankrupt. He probably should have just given it to his heirs and let them spend it and waste it, but instead it was lost. So anyway, that's an example, but it comes to the point of diversifying. We want to diversify our risk in life. That's the whole idea of insurance. Insurance companies insure you against your risk. Then they take your money and invest it in hundreds of different places in order to make sure that if something goes south over here or over there or wherever, that there's still enough money to pay your insurance risk if your house burns down or your car crashes or whatever it is that you're being insured for. So the Lord is saying diversify. And he means diversify in a lot of ways. He means diversify financially, but he also means diversify in terms of your food supply. Don't take all of your food and put it in one silo and one warehouse, because if some bug gets in there or some disease gets in there, you could get wiped out. So he's saying to diversify everything in your life, or all the physical things that sustain your life. Questions on that? Let's move on to verse 3. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. So what's he saying here? He's saying we watch clouds, and as moisture rises, the cloud builds up and gets thicker and heavier and thicker and heavier. And the more moisture that comes up into the cloud, the heavier and thicker it's going to get. Can that process keep going on forever? Can all that moisture just keep building up and building up and building up, and the clouds just grow and grow and grow forever? No. Eventually it's going to rain, right? Eventually that moisture is going to come back. It's going to come back down out of the clouds. So the Lord is saying, if the clouds are full of water, at some point they can't just keep taking water. At some point they will empty themselves out. Same thing's true. If we take our grain and put it all in one place, or take our resources and put them all into one place, eventually that place will empty out for some reason. If you take a look at the famous Dow Jones 30 industrials today and look at what they were 100 years ago, none of them are the same, right? All those companies are gone. Those are not the big companies in America today. These are the 30 biggest companies of 100 years ago. None of them are there today. For a long time, I used to say at least AT&T is still around, but they're not even here anymore either. So, yeah. So you can't just put the things that are important to sustaining your life in one place, because eventually almost everything will empty out. Eventually, just like the clouds empty out. Interesting. Good wisdom here. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. So when a tree falls, it goes boom, and it's going to fall one way. It may fall north, it may fall south. Whichever way it falls, it's there. And there's nothing you can do to change how it fell once it fell. Now, before it falls, you can cut over here or do this or push it that way or pull it this way, and you can change where it falls. But once it has fallen, it is there. It has fallen. At that point, it can't go back up again and fall in another direction. So there are certain things in life that when they happen, they're unchangeable. And there are many things in life that when they happen, they are unchangeable. Pretty obvious to most of us, but that is what he's saying here. Verse 4. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not weep. So he's talking about farming. Remember, this was an agricultural economy here back in ancient Israel. And farmers know that if you're sowing seed on a windy day, the wind's going to blow your seed around, right? Especially if it's something light, like a wheat seed or something very light. The wind will blow it around, and it may not fall where you want it to fall. So what do? Do you wait for a calm day and not sow your seed today? That's a possibility. By the way, you may look up and say, oh, I don't think it's going to rain for a few days. Maybe I better hold off sowing my seed because it might not rain and I need some rain to germinate that seed. Same kind of thing might happen at the harvest time. You might say, well, it's too windy to harvest today, or it's too rainy to harvest today. The Lord is saying, have some faith. Just do it. Go for it. Put it out there. The Lord will provide, but he may provide differently than you may expect him to provide. But go ahead and put the seed out there, because you may never have a day where the wind is perfect and the rain is perfect and everything is perfect for planting. You may wait to the point where it's too late and now you can't get your crop in time, or you can't harvest it in time. So the Lord is saying, go for it. If you're a farmer, go for it. And that's just true of other things in our lives as well. Let's not wait around forever for things, hoping to get perfect conditions for everything. Let's do it when we can, and the Lord and have faith that the Lord will provide. Questions on that? Okay, verse 5. As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. So, we don't understand how the wind's going to blow in the next 10 seconds, right? Right now it may be blowing this way. 10 seconds from now it may be coming from there. It may be blowing at 20 miles an hour now, and 10 seconds from now it may be blowing at 10 miles an hour. We don't know. We have no idea. Winds swirl and change and turn, and we have no idea what's going to happen with the wind. The Lord controls the wind. We do not. We can look at it and try to figure it out, but at the end of the day, the Lord controls the wind. So let's not plan our lives around trying to figure out what things that we can't control are going to do. Let's plan our lives around praying for God to provide for us. It says you cannot know how a body is formed in a mother's womb. This is one of many, many passages we see in the Bible that says that the growth of a baby, of a child in a mother's womb, is completely controlled by God. Even today, and when I was a boy, I can remember they didn't have pictures yet that were in utero. They didn't have things that showed babies in the womb back then. They didn't have the photography capability to look at that today with ultrasound and all the stuff we have today. We had no idea what was going on in the womb. Today we know a lot more than we did then, but we still don't know all the magic. How does it really happen? At what point and how exactly does God take this group of cells and turn it into this eternal being, this being that is going to be with God forever. How does he do that? What is the process by which he does that? We know he does it in there. We know it happens in the womb. Scientists today still don't know that. We still don't really know what actually is our consciousness, what really is our spirit, and where is it in our body? Or is it in our body at all? We still don't know that even today with all the science that's going on out there. No scientist anywhere can separate for you the difference between body and spirit, body and soul, and tell you all that difference. As much as we know, we still don't know that today. So there's so much we don't know. Just like how God forms the body of a baby inside the mother's womb. He goes on to say, you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. We, as poor human beings, are not able to understand the mind of God. We cannot understand how he does all this stuff that he does. We just have to have faith that he does it, and we have to have faith that he does it for our good, for the good of us and for the good of that child. And he is the maker of all things. He's the one who creates all of that. Questions on any of this? Okay, verse 6, pardon me. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Okay, so let's talk about a farmer again. You've got this seed. You're thinking, do I plant it today? Is today the right day? Well, we looked at that earlier, and God said, go ahead, plant it. You'll never know when the wind's going to be right. You'll never know when the rain's going to be right. Just go ahead and do it and trust in God. By the way, most farmers I know are not atheists. Most farmers I know understand the fact that God controls things out there. So, do you sow your seed in the morning? Do you sow it in the afternoon? Do you sow it at the heat of the day? Do you sow it at night? Do you sow it overnight? When in the day is the right time to sow it? Let's talk about that question. We talked about what day. Now let's talk about when. What he's basically saying here by showing in the morning and in the evening, that's the two halves of the day, right? He's saying sow it whenever. Just sow it. Once you start, do it. Once you start planting and plant it. Start in the morning, finish in the evening, start in the afternoon, continue into the night, whatever. Just keep on going and sow it. Once you've made the decision to put your grain in the ground, do it. Go ahead and trust in God that he will provide. For you do not know which will succeed. We have no way of knowing. We don't know whether a piece of grain that we sow at 10 o'clock in the morning is going to do better than a piece of grain we sow at noon, or a piece of grain we sow at 8 o'clock in the evening, or a piece of grain we sow at 3 o'clock in the morning. We have no idea which one is going to do better. We just have to trust in the Lord that he will provide that. It says, we don't know whether this one will succeed or that one will succeed, or whether both will do equally well. A piece of grain planted at a different hour may do better or may do worse. We don't know. We just have to trust in him. Questions on that? Okay, verse 7. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. So, we love doing things in the daytime. It's easier for us to see in the daytime. It's brighter. We can see things better in the daytime than we can at night. That's why most businesses are open in the daytime. Some are open at night, but most businesses are open in the daytime. In particular, businesses that are doing things outdoors tend to be more likely to be open in the daytime because there's better light. You don't have to worry about it. Are my lights good enough? Is my power going to fail and my lighting go out or whatever? In the daytime, God provides the light. He provides it for us. And light is sweet. Light is something that we have and we can see with out there. It's pleasing to the eyes. Verse 8. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. Let me actually stop there, and then I'm going to finish that one later. So we don't know how many years we're going to be on this earth. Let's enjoy every year we have. Look at every year as though it might be our last. Look at every year as though this is the one we need to completely enjoy. Yeah, it's great to be planning for the future. Can't do without that. But let's look at this year and say, I want to enjoy this year. I might not be here next year. I might get hit by a truck. A meteorite might fall and hit me. Whatever. By the way, a few people every year, and I always joke about meteorites. Interestingly enough, a handful of people around the world every year get hit by meteorites and get killed by meteorites falling from space. It really does happen. The chances are awfully, awfully slim. It could come crash right through the roof of your house and kill you while you're sleeping in your bed some night. But the chances of something striking you and killing you are not zero. They are very, very slim, but they are not zero. Just like the chance of getting hit by a truck crossing the street. It's not zero. So look at every year as though this might be the last year you have. And then he goes on to say, as he continues in that, let me go back again. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. So enjoy them all. Enjoy your life. God gave you this life. Enjoy it. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. So notice he's talking about the years. Enjoy the years, but remember the days of darkness. So our life is basically going to be a time for us to enjoy the life God's given us over years. But there will be days of darkness. There will be some small times in those. We need to remember these are relatively small things. There will be days of darkness that we will encounter in there. And they may be caused by a lot of things. They may be caused by death. They may be caused by injury, by illness, by famine, by whatever kind of thing may happen to us in our lives. These might be days of darkness, but they are limited. Those days of darkness normally come to an end. And we need to enjoy the years of life that we have, each year that we have, and not focus on the day of darkness we may be facing today. Good advice, right? Good advice. For there will be many days of darkness in our lives. Those of us that have lived a few years know that we've lost many people along the way. Know that we've encountered many illnesses or many injuries, and that people around us have encountered many illnesses or injuries. There certainly is darkness in life, but the darkness we need to think of as being in terms of days, and the lives of enjoyment that we live, we need to think of as being in terms of years. That's how God designed us. He says, everything to come is meaningless. So whatever's going to happen in the future, don't worry about it. Yes, we need to do some planning for the future. We need to make sure we plant crops so that we have food in the fall. Yes, we need to do that. But whatever's going to be happening, we don't know. We don't know everything that's going to be happening. So it's meaningless for us to try to overplan for that and try to come up with, a contingency for or a solution for every possible contingency that we may run into. We have to trust that God will provide for us. Questions on it? Verse 9, you who are young, be happy while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart, and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Okay, so now he's talking about young people. This next two verses, he's talking about young people. After that, we're going to talk about old people. So old people, wait out, your turn is coming here. But he's going to talk about young people first. He says, for you who are young, be happy when you're young. Youth is a beautiful time in your life. Every time in your life is a beautiful time in your life. Youth is a beautiful time in your life. Be happy. Many youth today are stressed. They're anxious. They worry about the future. What will the future hold? Don't. The Lord will take care of the future. Be happy while you're young. Enjoy the fact that you can run and dance and jump and do all the things in life that you can do at this age, because there will be a time when you can't do those same things. Let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. So be happy, be joyful. Let your heart bring you into a state of joy during this period when you are young. It's a wonderful time in your life. Every time in your life is a wonderful time in your life. But young people, be aware this is a wonderful time in your life. Follow the ways of your heart, and whatever your eyes see, So go for it. Go with it. If you want to go take a beautiful walk or take a nice swim or go do some dancing or singing or whatever, go for it. Go do it. Enjoy the things that you do in your youth. There are many things you'll do in your youth that you can't do later in life. Enjoy them while you can, and just, follow what your heart's telling you to do. However, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So the things that you're doing when you're young, bear in mind that you still need to do things in a way that is godly. You need to do things in a way that God will approve of, in a way that you need to do things in a way that won't compromise you later with God. So make sure that, do the things that God wants you to do, but make sure that you're doing them in a way that won't compromise you eternally with God, because eventually God judges us all. And if instead instead of just enjoying his life and being godly, if instead a young person chooses to go into sin and dedicate his life to sin, God will bring that into judgment. It's not just old people that can sin, young people can as well. Verse 10, we're still talking about young people here. So then banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles of your body. I've read that a lot of people in Generation Z today have very high anxiety levels, that many people in Generation Z, young people today, are on anti-anxiety drugs, a lot more than were true in my generation or most of even the generations in between then and now. Anxiety is higher today. People blame that on a lot of different things. A lot of that is because of the wired nature of our generation, social media. I don't know what it all is. I think part of it is just separation from God. When people get separated from God, they tend to be more anxious because they know they're not in control, and they're not trusting him either. But, banish anxiety from your heart. He's saying, get the anxiety out of your heart. Don't be anxious. Don't be worried. Trust in God. Trust that he's going to bring you through this, and get off of all this other stuff that you're using and be with him. It says, and cast off the troubles of your body. When you're young, sometimes you have troubles with your body as well. It's not just old people that have troubles with your body. You can have troubles with your body. Ask any athlete, any professional athlete, and chances are they have a list of injuries that they have encountered over the years, and yet they keep coming back and doing their sport. Cast off the troubles of your body. Just forget about them. And youth and vigor are meaningless. Youth and vigor are here for you today. Use them now, enjoy them now, because at some point you won't have them, and you'll look back and you'll think, wow, what did I do with that time? What did I do with that period in my life? So use them now and enjoy them now, because there is such a great gift coming from the Lord. Questions? Okay, now we're going to move into chapter 12. We've finished up now talking about young people. Old people, guess what? Your turn is next. It's coming. The next 5 verses are probably 5 of the most difficult verses in the Bible for old people. So sorry about that, old people. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. So there's a bunch of stuff in there. First of all, remember your Creator. Whatever age you are, remember God. Keep him in your heart. Keep him in your lives. Keep your lives committed to him, whatever age you're at. Remember him in the days of your youth, when it's so easy to just say, oh, I'll worry about him later. I got plenty of life ahead of me. You may not have. Remember him in the days of your youth. And that's before the troubles come, because the days of trouble are coming. Now, the days of trouble is an interesting phrase. Let me figure out where I found that again. The days of trouble comes from Paul in Ephesians 5:15 through 17. Let me take a look at that first. It's a term that Paul uses in there. Okay, Ephesians 5:15 through 17. Be very careful then how you live, Not as unwise, but as wise. Remember, we're talking here about not earthly wisdom, we're talking about above the earth wisdom, heavenly wisdom. Making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. So he's saying there is evil in the world. There is, and it's some of the translations, this is Greek now, different language than what we were talking about earlier. But some of the translations declare that, or that use a different term for that. The term that some of the translations use are, let me find that again here, the days of trouble. And we have the days of trouble in here as well. So before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. So the days of trouble mean that as you get older, there will be things that will happen in your life, things that will be sad. You will have more death that you will see around you in life. You will see more suffering in life. You will see more personal, you will experience more personal suffering, more physical things in your life, perhaps more mental suffering. So the days of trouble are coming in your life. Don't worry about them. You'll handle them when they get here. But the days of trouble are coming. The years approach when one day you will say, I find no pleasure in them. So as you get older and your body starts to wear out its warranty, you start to realize, I'm sorry. Yeah. As your body begins to wear out its warranty, you begin to realize that you're not quite as healthy as you used to be. There are things that you used to be able to do that you can't do. You get sore easier, you get sick easier, or you can't, whatever, see, hear, whatever it is. There are things that just don't happen the same way they used to happen. Don't worry, young people, it's coming. If you're lucky, you'll get to experience that someday. If not, then enjoy your life now. But those of you that are older understand that you're in that time now. You're in a time now when there are things happening that you don't find as much pleasure in as you did back when you were younger. I think most of us that are older understand that. Every time we get an ache or a pain doing something. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain. So, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. So what happens as we age? Our vision normally goes, right, guys? Both of you in the back row, our vision normally goes. I'll never forget when I was, I think, 38 and a half years old. I was in to see the optometrist once, and he said, in 6 months, you're going to need glasses to read. I thought, oh, how does he know that, right? Well, sure enough, 6 months later, I needed glasses to read, and I've needed them ever since then to read. Your eyes go as you get older. Your eyes don't see as well. You have these things called cataracts, which means things aren't as bright as they used to be. So your eyes begin to go. That's the first thing he says happens to people as they age, is that their eyes go. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. So we begin to lose that great vision that we used to have. And the clouds return after the rain. So the rain falls, it refreshes the earth, but clouds come back. So there are things that come into our lives that are dark and cloudy and foreboding that come into our life as we're older. Things happen. We can lose people and all of that. Then he goes on in verse 3 to say, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop. So what happens to people as they get older? They aren't as stable. They tremble. Yeah. You begin to tremble as you get older. It's part of the deal. It's part of getting older. If you're lucky enough to be old enough to do that, then you will tremble when you get older. Many of us know that. It's part of the deal, part of that part of life. Strong men stoop. I've lost about 1.5 inches from what I was when I was 20. I don't know, some of you have probably lost a little weight. I'm not as tall as I used to be. The discs between my vertebrae are compressing as I'm getting older. They're also falling apart as I'm getting older. So yeah, am I as straight and tall as I was when I was 20? No, not quite. I'm a little shorter and a little more hunched over in a few places. When the grinders cease because they are few. People lose teeth, right? Grinders, people lose teeth. Now today we don't lose teeth as fast as we did years ago, but in my parents' generation, grandparents' generation, a lot of people were missing teeth or had totally false teeth. You know, somewhere around 50 or 60 years ago, we started putting fluoride into water, and our teeth have gotten a lot better since then in general. But still, we can lose teeth as we get older. And certainly back in Solomon's day, people did. They lost teeth as they got older. Our grinders cease because they are few. And those looking through the windows grow dim. So again, he's talking about eyes. Looking at things grows dim. It's not as distinct as it used to be. You can't read the road signs from 1,000 yards away anymore. You're lucky to read them if you're right up close. Your eyes do not have the same vision. These are parts of the cost of growing old. Verse 3, verse 4, I'm sorry. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when people rise, let me stop with that. So when the doors to the street are closed, when we don't go out as much as we used to. We used to go out all the time, right? We'd always be out mowing the lawn or doing this or cutting this or trimming that or running around or doing something. As we get older, we don't go out as much as we used to. It's just not as easy to get around as it used to be. So as we get older, the doors are more closed for us. We tend to spend more time inside of our house than we did when we were younger. Part of growing old. And the sound of grinding fades. Well, there's two different ways to look at that. Some experts will say that the grinding being talked about here is, again, teeth. The grinding of your teeth. As your teeth are falling out, your teeth aren't grinding the way they used to. Some people will be talking about grinding of your stomach, digestion problems. Many people get digestion problems as they get older. Welcome to getting older, right? If you're lucky enough to experience getting older, you may have some of these problems. When people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When our sleep patterns get interrupted. I don't sleep an entire night anymore the way I used to for 8 or 10 hours. I can't do that anymore. I wake up a few times during the night. Sometimes I'm up, as my wife knows, at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just wide awake. What am I going to do, right? It is, your sleep pattern isn't as good when you're older as it was when you were younger. So you hear this, you rise up at the sound of birds. The sound of birds is early morning, right? The birds are out there as it's just beginning to get light in the morning. But all their songs grow faint. Your hearing starts to go when you get older too, right? Your hearing isn't as good as it used to be. So your hearing can go as you get older. Isn't getting older fun here? Verse 5, when people are afraid of heights. Let me tell you, I haven't been up on ladders in quite a few years now. I don't do ladders anymore. I'm not as stable as I used to be, and I don't do ladders. So yes, I'm afraid of going up ladders. I'm afraid of getting up on heights. I hire people to clean out my gutters now, or to, get the snow off my roof, or whatever it is. It's just, that's what you do as you get older. You become more careful about heights. When I'm walking down a flight of stairs, I hold onto the railing now. I didn't do that even 5 years ago. When I'm walking down the stairs, I hold on to the railing now. Welcome to getting older, right? It's part of the process. If you're lucky enough to get older, you will experience some of these things. People are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets. Got to be careful crossing the street. I can't run across the street as fast as I used to, right? Used to be if I saw a car, I could just poof, run and get across the street. Well, I don't run quite the way I used to years ago. And things are a little more dangerous out there, so you don't have that same speed that you had years ago. When the almond tree blossoms, the almond tree is used frequently in the Bible to talk about your hair, because the almond tree turns a grayish white when it blossoms, just kind of like your hair. So some of us have our hair turn into almond trees, some of us just lose our hair. But when the almond tree blossoms, so when your hair turns gray, you might look at that and say, oh, my hair is gray. It didn't used to be gray. Well, again, if you're lucky enough to get old, you may experience that, or you may experience it falling out completely. And the grasshopper drags itself along. Okay, this is probably talking about the male sexual organ. Sometimes the Bible gets a little into things, and this is probably talking about that. And it says, and desire no longer is stirred. And older people frequently have less desire, less attractive desire, if you will, than they had when they were young. So this is a description we've been looking at of getting old and what happens as you get old. Then he says, then people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. So all of this happens later in our lives as we are coming to the end of our lives. All of these things I just read about, hearing, vision, all, teeth, all that other stuff, happens later in life. And eventually, later in life, you will die. You will go to your eternal home, whether your eternal home is in heaven or someplace else. Your eternal home you will go to. And mourners will go along the streets, and people will mourn over you. People who knew you and loved you will mourn for your passing. So that's how life ends for most of us. Some of us may get raptured. If we get raptured, we won't experience that. But those of us who don't will experience death. Jesus said, and Paul said, that there will be a generation eventually of believers that will not experience death. Those will be the people that will be raptured. But that may not be in our time. That may be in some other time. Verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken. Remember him as God, right? So here's the idea of this thing. The silver string or the silver cord and the golden bowl. The idea is that what they did back in those days, that this is probably talking about a lantern. This is a lantern. And what they did back in those days was they built a clay bowl that was open on one side and covered it with gold on the inside. It was called a golden bowl. So that you put a candle in there and it would reflect the light out into the room. That was how lanterns were done back in that day. Today we have different lighting than that. But that was how lanterns were done. But this is ultimately a clay bowl. What happens if you drop a clay bowl on the ground? Breaks, right? So, at some point in time, the silver string, which is the he's comparing your life to a golden bowl. And he's saying and the silver string is what's supporting it. It's the things that are supporting it in life. At some point in time, if that string breaks, what's going to happen? And it will happen for us. At some point in time, that golden bowl will drop, our life will drop, it will hit the ground, and it will break. And that will be the end of that. So that's what he's comparing our lives to here. He's comparing our lives to a lantern. We bring light to the world while we're here, but at some point in time, we will no longer do that. So that's what he's talking about here. Questions on that? Before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well. Now we're talking about two things. We're talking about getting water up from a well. In those days, you didn't turn on the tap and get water. You went to the well to get water. And you had to crank something to pull a bucket of water up, and then you'd empty the bucket of water, and then you'd send the bucket back down and crank it back up again. That was how you got water in those days. So, is the pitcher shattered? The pitcher would be the bucket. Is the bucket shattered? Is it broken? Well, at the end of our lives, our pitcher, the thing that's filling our lives with life, ends. Our pitcher is shattered at the end of our life. Our bucket, if you will, that's bringing the water of our life up, is shattered at the end of our life. That's what he's talking about here. And the wheel broken at the well. The wheel there, he's talking about the thing that you pull. Some of you that have never been around a well might not know what I'm talking about, but these days some wells actually have motors on them. But at any rate, in the old days, you had to manually crank the bucket and bring it back up from the bottom of the well. If that mechanism is broken and you can't do that, then you can't get water out of the well unless you want to just pull the whole bucket up. But it's a lot harder to pull a bucket up that way than it is to just pull it up this way. You have different amount of work required. And the dust returns to the ground it came from. This is verse 7 now. and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So here we're now talking about how, man, thou art dust, and into dust thou shalt return, right? That is all over the Bible. We don't have enough time to get into all of them, but in your notes you'll see a bunch of references to that. God first sends it in Genesis 3:19, right at the fall of man. God tells Adam and Eve that they are dust, and into dust they shall return. Job 10:9 says it. Job 34:15 says it. Psalm 90, one of my favorite psalms, verse 3 says it. And Ecclesiastes 3:20 earlier in this book says the same thing. That man is dust, and eventually our bodies will return to dust. So we need to understand that our bodies are aging, and as we age, they are getting less capable. And eventually, when death comes, those bodies will turn to dust in the ground. You open a tomb that's 1,000 years old, and there's not much in there anymore. You might find some bones or something, that's about it. Then we're going to talk about, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So when our body dies and turns to dust, our spirit is released from our body. It's no longer imprisoned by our body. Our spirit returns back to God. Remember, we are created in God's image and likeness. That's not our body. God does not have a body with skin and 10 fingers and 10 toes and 2 ears and all that. That is not what that's saying. That's saying that we are spiritual beings. We are made in the image and likeness of God, who is also a spiritual being. And when we die, our spirit separates from our body and goes to be with God, assuming we are with him. So the spirit returns to God who gave it. So God gave us that spirit to begin with. Back in the womb, we talked about the womb earlier. God gave us that spirit in the womb, and now he's going to bring it back. Then in verse 8, he says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Again, the Hebrew word here is the word we saw way back in the very first lesson. It's called kohelet. And kohelet is translated teacher here. The first day we looked at that, we looked at a bunch of different translations of it. It can be teacher, preacher, a number of different things. Technically in Hebrew, it is a person who convenes a religious meeting. That's what a kohelet is. And that is the name that Solomon has chosen to call himself throughout this entire book. So as we're approaching the end of the book now, and we are only a few verses from the end of the book, we'll finish that up next week, he's back to calling himself by that name again, Kohelet. He's teaching us what he has learned in his life. And one of the things, as you look at those first 5 verses of chapter 12, we talked about getting old, you can kind of tell that he's experiencing a lot of this. I mean, the fact that he knows it so well, he remembers what it was like to be young, and now he knows what it's like to be old, tells us that he's probably writing this book very late in his life. There's a lot of things about this book that lead us to believe that this is the last book he wrote. He wrote 3 books. He wrote Song of Songs, which presumably he wrote when he was young, because it's all about love, loving women. He wrote Proverbs, which he probably wrote at the height of his power when he was the great wise king who was prepared to split the baby in half. And later in life, in his declining years, is when he writes this book, where he's kind of lost. He's trying to figure out what life's really all about, because he's kind of missed some of the meaning of life as he went along. So next week we're going to finish up our last 6 verses, which is the finale part of this book. It's the part that most people focus on in this book. And then we're going to talk about, how did Solomon come out of this whole thing? At the end of the day, is he with God today, or isn't he? It seems a little strange to ask that question. Here's a man who wrote 3 divinely inspired books of the Bible. Is he with God today? Interesting question. We'll talk about that next week. We don't know the answer. We won't know the answer, but we'll look at all the clues that the Bible gives us. Most of the other authors of books in the Bible we don't worry about. I mean, is Daniel with God? Yeah, certainly. There are other people out there as, Peter and Paul and Luke and Matthew and all those guys. Yeah, there's not much question about any of that, but there certainly is a question about him. So we'll talk about that next week as well. So, any other questions before we go? I got 1 more minute. I don't have 1 more minute. I'm getting the hook back here. So for those of you joining us at home, have a wonderful week. Have a happy New Year. And we'll see you again next week to finish up the book of Ecclesiastes. Thank you.